podemos hablar, ¿eh? Mientras esperamos, podemos hablar. Yeah. Sí, 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 no worries, really. No, no, no. Okay, shall we start? Yes, is it working? All right. Okay, good morning. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this session, to this presentation of the Decentralized Development Report 2022, produced by the Basque Country. Before proceeding with the official launch of the workshop, let me recall two things that are important, especially for those following the event online. Presentations and conversations will be in English, but there is translation into Spanish. So those following the session online, you have a specific button to choose language in your Zoom. And also for those following the debates online, there will be the possibility to participate in the conversation using the chat. So if you want to put questions, if you want to provide your comments, please use your chat button, and the organization will send me the messages in order to put the questions to the panelists, etc. Okay, so after these brief instructions, now we will start with the official launch, with the presentation of the seminar, with the welcome remarks. I have with me in the table Marta Marin, delegate of the Basque Country to the EU, Fabrizio Rossi, dear colleague, Secretary General of the CMR, and Noemi de la Fuente, Head of Strategy, Planning, Knowledge and Partnership at the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation. So, Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, please. Egunon denoi, good morning, and welcome to the Basque delegation to the European Union. I think that the topic of today's workshop on decentralized cooperation generates a lot of interest, and proof of this is the large number of attendees, both in person and surely online. For sure, in the field of international cooperation and solidarity, development cooperation promoted by sub-state governments is still an unexplored field, despite the fact that decentralized cooperation grows steadily and surely in budgetary terms. To give you an example of the Basque Country, the figures in 2021 amount for more than 74 million euros, which is 10.4% more than the previous year. And the fact that we observed that in countries with greater aid decentralization, regional governments allocate budgets sometimes larger than those of some OECD DAC member states. But this phenomenon of decentralized cooperation, as I mentioned before, still needs more attention and appreciation. And for sure, we are all aware that the enormous diversity and fragmentation of this kind of decentralized cooperation don't help to monitor, study, and categorize, but we believe that the time has come to do it in a more systemic way, to learn lessons, and to improve results. Without any doubt, there is a window of opportunity right now because the localization of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals contribute to grant more and more attention to local and regional governments. In many cases, these initiatives in the field of decentralized cooperation are developed in collaboration with civil society, with helps to build solidarity networks and mobilize different actors in the territory in an articulated manner, in a coordinated manner. So this workshop of today, I think is very timely, I think it's very relevant, and I hope that this debate will contribute to the recognition and to the deployment of the enormous potential of the decentralized cooperation. And let me say, last but not least, I would like to thank you, eLankidetza, the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation of the Basque Government, whose director, Paul Ortega, unfortunately is not with us today because he is ill, so I sent him a huge hug from Brussels, to Euskal Fondoa, the Basque Municipalities Fund for Cooperation, to Platforma for organizing jointly this event, short all the panelists, the moderators, the representatives of the European institutions, the representatives of the OCDE, the Japanese Agency for Development Cooperation, the Fons Mallorquí, and all of you for your commitment. And I wish you a fruitful meeting, and I hand over to you, Agustí. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Now we have Fabrizio Rossi, Secretary General from the CMR. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Agustí. It's good to be here with you today. It's good indeed to see so many friendly faces across the room, starting with those sitting here next to me. Apologies for being late today. As we all know, it's a very busy week, the Urban Summit. We started as CMR our day today, this morning at 8:30, with a breakfast meeting between European local elected politicians and the Secretary General of European External Action Service, Mr. Stefano Sannino. I was really looking forward to this exchange. Let me start by congratulating you, indeed, the three Basque entities, the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation, Euskal Fondoa, the delegation of the Basque country to the European Union for organizing this event and bringing in those, all these attendees. It's quite a challenge to mobilize people given the very busy agenda we have on this week. And thank you very much to our partners, Euskadi, to our friends from Euskadi, from the Basque governments. Thank you also to those that have indeed put energy and efforts on the development of this report, to ECOPER and Aitor Perez. This is, I think, a very important piece of intelligence that we're producing with this report. We just this morning, with Mr. Sannino, the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, we discussed the new geopolitical order and these new dynamics of blocks, and how these are impacting the life of territories and local governments on the ground. And indeed, it was a very interesting discussion. we cover quite some ground, from the Russian imperialist attitude, the war in Ukraine, but also the increasing role of China on the geopolitical stage. We also discuss how climate change and the discussion under COP around loss and damage, for instance, are also creating tensions between the global south and Western countries. Well, one of my main takeaways from this discussion is that I believe that decentralized cooperation will be more and more needed in the future. Will be needed even when those diplomatic channels at the national level, they are stuck. Development cooperation, city-to-city cooperation, region-to-region cooperation will be there also to open those doors that are closed because the discussion at national level is not able to progress. So I think that this is quite clear, to me it's quite clear that we will have a strong role to play in the future. But for this, we need to improve, we need to professionalize the work that we are doing on decentralized cooperation. And for this, we need knowledge, we need data, we need intelligence. This is why this report, the production of this report, is a very good start. Last week, we, the CMR, we had our policy committee in Georgia, in Tbilisi. It was the first time ever we organized such an important meeting for us, for the life of our organization in Georgia. Within that meeting, we had also the chance to visit the occupied territories, those territories that belongs to Georgia that are currently occupied by the Russian forces. That was also a meeting for me and for us, for those that are having leadership position within the organization, to really state very clearly the value of decentralized cooperation, the commitment that we have to decentralized cooperation and to a program like Platforma, for instance. This was very clear last week. I do believe, myself as Secretary General, I do believe that Platforma can become really a reference globally for decentralized cooperation. There is no other region in the world where we see such a high level of commitments from cities, regions, to work with their peers in other continents. This is quite unique. Of course, it's getting traction in other areas of the world, but this is very specific to the European Union, to Europe as a whole, since already many years. So I think the future for development cooperation for decentralized cooperation is bright, and I'm afraid it will be very needed. So thank you very much again, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful exchange with all of you. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, grazie Fabrizio. And now, last but not least, Noemi de la Fuente, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to this hybrid workshop on the Decentralized Cooperation Report 2022 that we have recently published. Today is the international launch of the report. First of all, as Marta said, Paul Ortega can't be today with us. And in his name, I would like to thank you all for joining us. We have gathered today more than 150 people from international organizations, public institutions, social organizations, academia, to learn more and discuss on decentralized development cooperation. The excellent response to this workshop confirms our belief that decentralized cooperation has never received sufficient attention, and that that his enormous potential, there is enormous potential to go beyond. So from these premises, we set out to launch the report, which will be the first in a regular series of analysis. And as Fabrizio said, we aim to fill a gap in the systematic and regular reporting of ODA, based in categories relevant for decentralized development actors, and make a significant contribution also to the public debate on development cooperation and to the enhancements of the value of the participation of sub-state governments in the international development cooperation system. Throughout the day, we would like to discuss the findings and the methodology of the report, discuss how to improve the data collection, and identify challenges for future report. Finally, I would like to thank all the speakers and the European Commission support to Platforma that has made the organization of this event possible. And without further ado, we hope you enjoy the day and that we can have an open and honest dialogue. So I give you back the floor, Agustí, to begin with the first session of the workshop.
Great, thanks, Noemi. I think we have to change the panel now. So I invite Aitor, Aziza. Pasáis. Sí. ¿Quieres agua, sí? Okay, then we will start with the first panel. As you might be aware, the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation has recently published a study to further contribute to the knowledge and assessment of decentralized development cooperation. Building on the report and on the main findings of the report, this workshop and this panel will further explore in key issues such as the relevance of decentralized development cooperation from a quantitative perspective, what is the relevance of decentralized ODA, decentralized official development assistance, the added value of the current modalities of decentralized development cooperation. Within this framework, we will deepen on direct cooperation, partnerships built between territories, partnerships built between local and regional governments. We will also focus on technical cooperations. We will have some very added value experiences here in the room. We will also address how to promote and how to mobilize territorial actors and their capacities, how to mobilize the private sector, how to mobilize the knowledge sector, knowledge-based institutions, civil society organizations, how to ensure complementarity with central governments, what can be done to improve accountability and the quantitative analysis of decentralized development cooperation. We will try to imagine further prospects to reinforce the impact of this modality of international cooperation. As I said, the workshop will be divided into parts. Before the lunch, we will have this panel with a presentation of the main findings of the report from a quantitative perspective. We will debate on the main conclusions and the main recommendations. And after the lunch, we will have the presentation of 2 case studies included in the report, and we will focus, as mentioned, in direct cooperation, in technical cooperation, as an added value modality of decentralized cooperation. For this part 1, we will start with Aitor Perez, the author of the report, co-author of the report. Aitor Perez is chief consultant at ECOPER. We will have, as discussants, reacting to the conclusions and recommendations and the data showed by Aitor, Andrea Ferrari. He works at INPA, at the European Commission, and he is responsible for local authorities. He's team leader of local authorities. And Aziza Kmouch, head of division of cities, urban policies, and sustainable development at the OECD. OECD, author of many very, very relevant reports on decentralized cooperation, reports that have provided knowledge, information, intelligence also to the necessary conversations and dialogues and that we have to to reinforce decentralized cooperation. So without further comments, I give the floor to Aitor to present the report.
Thank you, Agustí. Thank you, Delegate, and thank you to all the entities that have made possible this event, Euskal Fondoa, Platforma, and of course, Lankidetza. Please let me also thank the people that have made possible the report as such. We are 3 authors, actually, 2 colleagues from Ecoper, Beatriz, David, and myself. And actually, in this report, the eLankidetza, the Basque Agency for Development Cooperation, have not only commissioned the report, but they have been very active in defining the scope, the goal of the report, and also revising the work of the researchers. So here, thank you to Noémie and Paul for this revision work, and also for the very initial idea. I remember that when I was collaborating with the Elcano Royal Institute, I issued a couple of papers on this phenomenon, based also on ODA data, and we were really amazed. We were amazed. I mean, Paul and Noémie already had the impression that the phenomenon was not well known, but in Spain, when we published the report, we happened to discover that 1/3 of the Spanish bilateral aid was provided at the regional and local level. And not even many of the most important actors of the Spanish cooperation system were aware of that. So we thought, here there is some room for further research, and here is how Noémie and Paul came with this fantastic idea of issuing in a regular basis, in a systematic manner, a report that informs of the last year of activities in development cooperation. Of course, it's not only about quantitative analysis and data. We think also that data is always a good opportunity for additional reflection, and that is what we plan to do with this report. We plan to fill in this gap with two sections every year, one on quantitative data, ODA budgets, and a second, more qualitative, based on case studies and comparative analysis that favors reflection on how to make decentralized cooperation more effective and more relevant. And also, to end with these initial acknowledgements, let me say that the report also owes a lot to the work of the OECD, ACISA. Of course, this is based on ODA data, and I believe that it wouldn't be possible without the enormous amount of work directed by your colleagues at the Directorate General for Development Cooperation, but also with participation from all donors at the various levels of governance. So this is, I think, a very good exercise of accountability, and we are just harnessing and tapping into this rich database to produce this report, as many other scholars and practitioners do on different topics of development cooperation. So the purpose is clear. I think the delegate has already made the case for this report, and let me provide some of the main findings of this first edition of the Decentralized Cooperation Report. Well, first of all, we have had to agree on a concept of decentralized cooperation, because we all know that in its broadest sense, the term refers to participation of local and regional governments, both when providing aid, when channeling aid, and receiving aid. So this is like a very broad scope of activities, and it gives room to many different public actions. So we are rather focusing on development cooperation activities that involve contributions from northern sub-state governments. Of course, these contributions need to be oriented to development goals, both in southern countries, but also at the global level, and they must not be based on commercial or financial interests, meaning that they are collaborative relations. On this basis, we have also put the focus on ODA-funded activities. And that's why in the report we introduce the term decentralized ODA. And this is I would say, the difference of this report from other exercises of analysis of decentralized cooperation. We do focus on decentralized cooperation funded with budgets allocated at the subnational government level. So that is our perspective. So of course, we hold that this is still an unknown phenomenon, but it's not the first report on decentralized cooperation, and we actually enter into a debate in which there has already been a lot of interesting contributions. Let me, now that we have here at the table the OECD and the European Union, let me recall the aid effectiveness agenda, for instance. Local governments, regional governments have already been analyzed from the perspective of the aid effectiveness agenda. And here they were a bit controversial because they definitely added fragmentation to a system in which we already have the UN level, the EU level, the state government, the national government level, and then regional and local government. So from some perspective, the involvement of these smaller range actors in development cooperation, it is fragmentation, and it might be a risk for aid effectiveness and rationalization and recipient government ownership and planning and so on. But more recently, the diversity of this broad range of actors has been valued by most of the analysts, and of course the Sustainable Development Agenda and the idea of localizing SDGs have, I would say, revalued this type of cooperation. And we are at this point in which local actors in development are seen not only as donors, funders, but also as knowledge providers. So here is I think it's a nice moment for development cooperation, because this idea of localizing SDGs, of adding to the system with your own competencies, your own experience, and facilitating platforms in which knowledge can be shared, in which technical assistance can be provided among peers. This is a very good opportunity to relaunch decentralized cooperation. So we do make a short review of these debates, and then we enter, as I said, into this database, this enormous amount of work conducted by the OECD and donor governments, and we try to measure the phenomenon of development cooperation. First things we find is that there are 54 donor agencies that have uploaded data to this database, meaning that there are at least 54 entities of national governments that are active in development cooperation. Unfortunately, 16 of these agents are described in very generic terms, with tags like Spanish municipalities or Italian municipalities. This is, of course, a limitation for our study, because it does not allow us to go into the details. And of course, this is also a limitation of the database as such, because it enters in contradiction with the very idea of the credit reporting system of reporting on an activity basis. We do not find ODA activities reported at an activity basis for at least 16 countries, and mainly for the local government. We do find more details for the regional level, that governance level between the nation state and the cities. But this is a limitation. There are other limitations. For instance, we will see later on that we find a lot of in-country ODA allocated by subnational governments, and this in-country ODA usually has very little details also. So it does not allow researchers to connect to the real project, the real program that is justifying the allocation of ODA to that extent. So that's a second limitation. I also think of technical assistance activities that are not correctly accounted. We easily find that not all local governments use the term technical assistance in the same way, and this is a very important modality of cooperation in this agenda, and it would be good to, to have shared criteria when we decide to allocate this type of projects, and so on. Of course, so we do find some limitations, but we also find a huge amount of information. By the way, I think there was a remote control that would allow me to, to change slides. Yeah, may I have it, please? Yeah, I forgot about the slides, actually. So mainly for, just from now on, we're providing more data, so maybe it would be good to have, I have already referred to this first slide. Yeah, that's the one I wanted to focus on right now. The second thing that we do with this database is we tap into the diversity and the details of this database to produce a categorization of ODA that we find relevant for development, for decentralized cooperation actors. And here is also where the role of eLankidetza was key, because we were able to define these categories that are really meaningful for them. So we use the classical fields of the ODA, like country, recipient country, channel, sector, purpose, and type of aid, and we rebuild this using always the same OECD categories, but aggregating according to our needs. We produce this categorization. First of all, we differentiate based on the field agency between centralized and decentralized aid. By the way, this is something that we had to do ourselves because it's an information that it's not yet provided by the OECD. But everything can be revised because within the report, we introduce a link to the database that has made this possible. So anyone could check and find its own entity in this database. Following to that first differentiation, we take decentralized aid and we make a very important difference for this type of cooperation. We differentiate between cross-border or international aid and in donor country activities. Unfortunately, this makes a huge difference between some donors. We'll see some examples of it later on. Then for in-country aid, we have also a categorization that differentiates between development awareness, which is, for instance, the type of in-country aid more frequent in Spain, for instance, from refugees or student costs that are more regular in Germany, Austria, or Canada. Then, for international or cross-border aid, we differentiate between direct and indirect aid. Direct aid meaning direct relations between subnational governments in Europe, for instance, and Africa, and indirect aid channel through, most of the time, NGOs. NGOs that are based in the territory of the local government that provides ODA. So this is the more important categories for decentralized cooperation actors according to our exchanges with the Basque Agency, and this is how we present all the data in the report. So for the last year available, which was 2020, we found that ODA provided by sub-state governments amounted to almost $3 billion. $3 billion. So that's already quite a lot. There's been some growth, we'll see it now, and this represents probably not a huge share of ODA. It's only 2% of global ODA. Of course, not all countries provide decentralized aid. It's only 11 countries, most of them European countries. And in this group of countries, it represents up to 3.3% of their ODA. I think we have a time series with some trends. Yeah, here it is. So we see that this is definitely growing, and in comparison to the seminal studies of decentralized cooperation by the OECD in 2005, this has almost tripled. So it's growing and faster than central aid. going back to the category that I just presented, and as I already mentioned, another interesting finding is that in donor aid, in donor country aid, it's like 75% of the whole thing. So this is quite a lot, and it represents mainly student costs. Not only scholarships, but also the allocation of the expenditure in a given country of students coming from a third country tagged as a developing country. So this is, for instance, Chinese students in German universities. And I give this example because I've seen the database and there is a lot of this. So this is not the type of ODA that in this narrative about exchanges of knowledge and experience sharing among peers on local policies that are connected to the SDGs, this is not what it was about. But well, that's the way it is. I mean, and it's good to have the data and maybe reflect on what can be done in order maybe to compensate a bit the different categories of decentralized ODA. Then we have, of course, international or cross-border ODA. The OECD uses the term cross-border, but for regions like European regions, this is misleading because it has to do with the internal borders of the EU, so we have also changed the tag. This is what the whole thing is about making this report relevant and useful to the sub-state governments. And then we have direct cooperation. Probably another interesting finding is that even within international cooperation, the most important category of aid in terms of budget, it's not direct cooperation. It's cooperation through NGOs most of the time. So, and within direct cooperation, technical cooperation is even lower. So, a second finding I would say of this study, the reality of decentralized aid in budgetary terms does not match the international narrative about what decentralized cooperation should be. Well, we see this increase of aid that fortunately affects both to in-donor country aid and also cross-border or international aid. And then we look at the actors and we find, as already mentioned by the delegate, we find some important actors like Flanders, Catalonia, the Basque country, which actually have important budgets that might not be huge, but they are higher than some of those of some of the members of the DAC at the OECD. So they start to be already influential actors of this sector. In terms of countries, we mostly find Spanish entities, followed by the Belgian and the German lenders. Scotland is also visible in this list, and then of course the full list of actors is enormous. By its very nature, decentralized cooperation is about diversity and plurality of actors. Another interesting perspective, although the actors of decentralized cooperations are subnational governments, it is true that we find similar patterns within each country, within each state. So it is worth to look at decentralized cooperation country by country in an aggregated manner to find the different patterns of cooperation. In this domain, I already mentioned to the fact that Spain, for instance, stands out as the most decentralized aid country in the world, with 1 out of 3 euros allocated by subnational states. Then, in absolute terms, Germany is by far the most important player, but as we will see later on, it's mainly related to student costs. And then we have also Belgium, Canada, France, Austria, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, mainly with Scotland, and to a lesser extent, Portugal, Italy, and Japan. So very European phenomenon, but also global. We have Japan and we have Canada, so it is actually a global phenomenon. I think this slide is also important because we cannot, although we cannot give more value to either category, because the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD is the one that controls what is allocated as ODA and what is not. We do need to differentiate since the start those countries that mainly provide decentralized ODA as in-country expenditure, and those that really engage in transferring budgetary resources to southern countries and sometimes peer local governments in southern countries. So here the difference is very clear. Germany, Austria, and Canada are mainly providing in-country expenditure that benefits refugees and foreign students. That is the reality behind these figures. And then we have Italy, United Kingdom, Belgium, Spain, and Japan, and Switzerland that mainly provide international or cross-border aid. Let's focus on on a set of 3 countries that represent different trajectories in this respect. Spain is, as I said, the most decentralized aid system in the world, with 36% of bilateral ODA allocated at the regional and local governance level. Within in-donor country, development awareness activities are the most important budget, and then within cross-border aid, NGOs play the most important role. Direct cooperation is not that big in Spain. Germany is the opposite. Germany mainly allocates in-donor country aid, with 97% of the decentralized ODA budget allocated to student costs and administrative costs, so mainly the education sector. But within international aid, they stand out as an important player in direct cooperation. Maybe Germany, if they didn't have such a big amount of student cost allocation, maybe they would stand out as an important provider of direct cooperation. But this reality is hidden behind this huge amount of scholarships and student costs. And then a different profile is that of France, which actually matches very well this narrative of decentralized cooperation as an opportunity to favor direct links between peers, both in northern and southern countries. In France, we find that although there is some in-donor country activities related to refugee crisis, their international aid is mainly about direct cooperation between municipalities. So these are the three actors, the three countries that I wanted to highlight here. But in the report, we have provided a full fact sheet for all the states, all the donor countries that do provide decentralized ODA. So just to wrap up and start with the comments from Andrea and Asisa, I just wanted to highlight that this report does not cover the full variety of decentralized cooperation activities, but we thought that there is this unexplored reality of decentralized cooperation funded with local and regional resources, and we wanted to produce this systematic report. Of course, it is not the first time that such data are released, but such data are not released on a regular and systematic basis, and that is the idea of the Basque government to fill in this gap. Of course, it is worth highlighting that there is a narrative about localizing SDGs that really fosters this type of cooperation, but does not match with the reality of decentralized aid budgets. And maybe that also makes the case for this report in order to further reflect on how the theory and the reality of decentralized cooperation match or differ. Of course, important the fact that decentralized cooperation is continuously growing and has even tripled since 2005. And this is, of course, a very different phenomenon in each country with very different decentralization rates ranging from almost 0% in Japan to 36% in Spain. Within this diverse reality, we find some actors that are important, that are already managing relevant budgets, and that might also play a leading role in this phenomenon, and probably this report is a good example of that. Then we have some technical accounting challenges that they are worth highlighting. I am aware that Platforma and Catalonia are also concerned about these accounting issues, and they are trying to improve the full data system. And I think that I'm sure that in the Basque Country and ECOPER, we would be also happy to participate in that reflection and see how we can overcome limitations like the donor agencies that are not correctly identified in the database, the technical assistance projects that are not so technical, and also another important point that we do not mention in the report, but you all know, is that many interesting decentralized cooperation activities do not have a very high volume and are not reported at all. So they do not allow us to track the activities of other actors that might be important in qualitative terms. So, and I leave it here. I know there are more data that are worth mentioning, and I know that some of you are managing programs that reflect in this report, but maybe this is something that we can catch up with during the debate. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Aitor, for this very insightful presentation of the report and the main conclusions of the report. I think we have lots of food for thought and to reach our debate. We have seen the relevance of decentralized cooperation also from a quantitative perspective, despite many think, and I would include in myself, many think that the added value of decentralized cooperation does not lie in the capacity that this modality has to deliver budgets, but it is also, and I fully agree, that it's very, very relevant to measure the capacity that this decentralized ODA has to mobilize resources. This difference between we have different realities, countries that are mobilizing resources for this in-country cooperation, to fund scholarships, to fund students, to support refugees, etc. Other countries that are more oriented towards cross-border cooperation, international cooperation, but here also huge differences. Countries that are, like Spain, that are channeling this support mainly through NGOs, and other countries maybe mobilizing less resources. The case of France, I think it's very interesting, but having the capacity to focus in the construction of these bridges between territories and focusing in technical cooperation. And also the constraints, the limitations to measure. And here I would underline the difficulty to measure technical assistance, technical cooperation from a local or regional perspective. If we agree that the capacity that local and regional governments have to provide knowledge or to exchange, providing knowledge, providing innovation, etc., it would be very, very relevant to have the capacity also to measure this capacity, and it's really, really difficult. So we have lots of things to discuss, and we move now to the reactions of the two discussants that we have on the table. We will start with Andrea Ferrari from the European Commission to provide this first reaction to the presentation of Aitor.
Good morning. So thank you very much for the invitation to the Gobierno Vasco, Platforma, and Aziza, Gusti, Aitor. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and felicitation for the work done. Very interesting. I went through the report, and it's very well done. We not that because you choose some criteria at the beginning is not capturing everything, but it was not the objective of the report. We want some data that can foster the debate, that can give some data to reflect on. And I was told to talk about a little bit about the potential of the decentralized cooperation in the European Union work. So I will talk a little bit about that, trying to make some reference to the report. It will be not easy, but I will try to do that. Talking about the importance of producing such kind of studies, analysis for the debate. So I think that the diversity we saw, and Augusti was highlighting, is the beauty. The beauty of such kind of cooperation modality. And I think that the trend, we saw in the report that the decentralized cooperation is increasing in time is also due to a change in the technology. Now it's much more easier for a small municipality to connect to another small municipality in Asia or in Africa. We have instrument and technology that 15 years ago were not available, or if available, not for all. So perhaps this is something that can be a point of reflection. Of course, if we open the criteria of the report, we can capture a lot of things are going on that are not, they are without a specific money value. I'm thinking, I know that there are some government providing medical services through online systems in Africa. So that's impossible to capture the value of such kind of support in our partner countries. Very quickly, on decentralized cooperation and the European Union. Our main policy on decentralized cooperation is dated 2005. And then we have a policy for supporting local authorities of 2013. The policy that are guiding our work are still absolutely valid. Because I think the European Union at that time was a pioneer in exploring the potential of the decentralized cooperation. I'm new to the sector, so I'm sure that a lot of you that are working in the sector since years know better than me that the European Union put a lot of attention since the beginning of this century on decentralized cooperation. And there was a specific budget line managed by my colleagues here in Brussels to promote the work with local authorities and civil society. Unfortunately, with a new budget for 2021-27 and the introduction of the principle of geographication, bad word, but means that we are giving more money to the delegation, this budget line disappeared. And but how to complain the European Union to in such kind of decentralization effort? Because at the end, what we are doing is decentralizing our budget to our delegation. So in principle, is a good thing. What we are, let's say, we are facing some difficulties because the delegation in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, are not ready to take the challenge and start working with local authorities and also promoting decentralized cooperation. The main reason, I think, is that we are implementing at the country level bilateral cooperation with central government. So it's very difficult for our colleagues at the country level to go outside the scheme of the bilateral cooperation. In any case, we have some instrument in place at the moment to support the delegation in that effort. So we have a facility that any moment in which a delegation needs support to write a program with local authorities, we can support them. But I want to mention the partnership agreement we have with 5 global associations: UCLG, UCLG Africa, CLGF, IMF, and Platforma. I think that this strategic partnership we have with the 5 global associations is the key to reach at the country level local authorities. In which way? What we are promoting in some selected countries is a partnership between our 5 partners, national association of local authorities in that specific country, our delegation, to work together in a policy dialogue that can then become a program, a project to be implemented. And the decentralized cooperation fit in such kind of scheme. Now, so another difficulties in the at the delegation level is the fragmentation of decentralized cooperation, because the beauty of the decentralized cooperation, so touching different topics in different kind of partnership, in different kind of modality we saw in your report, that is the beauty of this kind of decentralized cooperation, is a difficulty for our colleagues in the delegation, because they cannot follow all this richness, I don't know how to call it, all the value that the decentralized cooperation can exprime, no? At the country level. Simply because the delegation is small, there are a few people, they have some priorities. But I want to talk about some priorities our delegation has, because I think there is an entry point there for local authorities. And so the first one is the Global Gateway. I'm sure that you already heard about a Global Gateway. Is, I will say, the main investment strategy that the Commission has all around the world. So it's not just DG INPA, it's a strategy of the Commission. And in this strategy, DG INPA is providing support to our partner countries through guarantees, through blending operation. And we know, because we read in several reports of UCLG, Platforma, that public investment, at least 1/3 of public investment are implemented through local authorities. At least for Latin America. I think that in Asia, the percentage is higher. I don't have the data for Africa, but means that the main strategy of the European Union in external relations cannot be implemented without the involvement of local authorities. And because part of the strategy is also the transfer of technology, the transfer of knowledge, I think that decentralized cooperation can also play a key role in the implementation of the strategy. The only missing point here is I hope that it will remain among us, is that we didn't consider local authorities in our main strategy, okay? But it's not a problem, okay? Because we sometimes we forget a lot of things. This is particularly important, and think is the good thing of the European Union is never too late, because our timing is quite generous, and so my how to say my message, I would like to to launch again my invitation to work together with you, with other members of Platforma, to see how we can better include local authorities and decentralized cooperation in this main strategy. I don't know how is the time, but I would like just to mention another approach of the European Union. You already heard about the Team Europe initiative. This is an initiative of member states together with the Commission at the country level, where we are implementing our bilateral cooperation. We identify emblematic initiative together with member states, and we call it a Team Europe initiative. Depending on the country, depending on the priority, depending on the bilateral cooperation, can be on climate change, can be on health or other sector. Why is important the Team Europe initiative? Is not a mechanism for funding a project or initiative, but it's an approach in which also local authorities should participate, because the logic of the Team Europe initiative is the partnership. That's why we call ourselves now international partnership. And so we cannot leave a partner like local authorities outside of our main approach. Unfortunately, there is less I can do from Brussels. That's something that should happen at the country level. So depending on the country you are working in, the point is try with our support, with the support of the 5 global associations, to approach the delegation, to understand which are the priority, try to enter in policy dialogue, and there is a lot of things can be done, even if there is no specific funding for it. And so this would be my conclusion, to invite all of you to partnership, and of course our office here in Brussels. We don't have any more budget line to support your work, but we are nice. We are hard workers, and you are very welcome to approach my office and see how we can work together. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. I would underline this phrase, it is never too late. I think it's very relevant to state this. The European Commission, the European Union has always been a great ally of decentralized cooperation. The European Commission since the 90s, the 80s, even the 80s, has been behind this emerging, always emerging form of international development cooperation. And there is a huge concern linked to the disappearance of this specific budgetary line among local and regional governments. This is true. In fact, there is the possibility to work through the delegations. In many countries, the problem is that working through the delegations means that the main partner of the delegation is the central government, and not always central governments are open to reinforce decentralized cooperation. So it is a quite difficult scenario today for decentralized cooperation to move forward. I'm glad to hear that through the Global Gateway, the European Union recognizes the role of local and regional governments for the... At least, but you work for the European Commission. That is
the effort is to let the Commission to recognize it.
But
if you help me,
I would fully agree with you. They play a crucial role. It will be impossible to develop this global strategy without the implementers of a very relevant part of public budgets throughout the world. So I fully agree with you. So let's work together to make this possible. And recalling, it is never too late. Okay. So Aziza Akmush, the OECD, I would like to recall again the importance, the relevance of the OECD to build knowledge, to make this modality of international development cooperation more informed, to be more effective, to produce more impacts on the ground. So I think that the work you have done from your unit with the various reports that you have produced is key to understand decentralized cooperation to move forward, improving these modalities. You have the floor for your inputs.
Thank you very much, Agustin. And I would like to start by thanking all the Basque authorities for the invitation today, Platforma, but also the European Commission. You've all been kinds of partners in crime over the past almost decade to push the frontier within the OECD on this very important topic that decentralized development cooperation is. And I'll come back to where we started a few years back, and I can tell you this is not where we're landing today. There was really a huge effort to convince governments and DAC countries in particular that unpacking the complexity of decentralized development cooperation, documenting the magnitude of decentralized development cooperation, but also changing some of the mindsets and prejudices around decentralized development cooperation was only going to be beneficial to the organization. So I try to structure a bit my thoughts, and of course, huge congratulations to Aitor and the co-authors for this very interesting piece. A lot of it is actually, we speak the same language. I think on some of the messages, I'll try to add a few that have come out of recent work that we did. As you said, there was a seminal piece back in 2005 that was mainly financial. I mean, it was really a tracking exercise of official development assistance extended through local and regional government, and then nothing during 10 years. That tells you how, important this was, or high in the radar of the development cooperation community at the OECD. And then back in 2015, we reignited somehow this conversation for a number of reasons that I'll expand to you, and have produced since then 4 main pieces that I think provide this sort of knowledge base within the OECD. One is a big report. You can all Google Decentralized Development Cooperation OECD, and that comes up. One is about reshaping decentralized development cooperation that we produced back in 2018 jointly with the then DevCo, that then became INPA. and your predecessors, Andrea, and with many case studies, including pioneer regions or cities. The Basque Country was actually one of them, and allowed really to have a sort of place-based understanding of these dynamics. We did produce then a sort of first ever decentralized development cooperation country review with Germany that was launched a few months back, and it was quite a game changer, and we can see to which extent this is triggering also interest from a number of countries to step into that bridge, not necessarily because they consider them ahead of the curve. I mean, we said Germany is the largest provider of decentralized development cooperation financial flows in terms of volumes, although a lot of it, and you're right in your analysis, goes to in-country students' costs, but it's also the largest provider of ODA at large. So it's making sense, this parallel. But Germany is also struggling with a number of hot potatoes in terms of how to align incentives across levels of government, how to address this fragmentation issue, how to make sure that subsidiarity principles and others are discharged at the right level. So there was also a transparency exercise, let's say, to open the books and say, we may be doing well in some parts, but not so well in others, and just, you know, saying explicitly what our headaches are may be insightful for others. So that was a second piece. A third one is a global policy toolkit, which you can also find online, on how to get decentralized development cooperation right, and in particular in that strategy of mainstreaming it in the very achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the fourth one, which I think is really paving the way for something bold going forward, is the latest piece we've done with the European Commission and DG INPA to produce this monitoring and evaluation framework that I think is also responding to a big concern, you know, which is that this is, you know, taxpayers' money, public money in the end. Regardless of the volumes, there's expectations around transparency, around accountability, be just to dispel some of the myths, you know, that have prevented the expansion of the phenomenon in the past. And what we've seen is that there was actually very limited, and that applies to development cooperation at subnational level, but to a number of policy areas at subnational level, there is very limited culture of actually monitoring the outcomes, the tangible benefits, the sort of return on investment, if I can call that an investment, from decentralized development cooperation activities. And part of that is that because a lot of it, as you rightly said, is not purely quantitative and financial. A lot of it is actually much less tangible. And I think that from the onset, we've been trying to say, watch out, ODA is one proxy to appraise, the extent of the activities, but you need a typology and methodology that is a lot more sophisticated to do justice to the work and the magnitude of the work that is done on the ground. So those are a bit of background elements. Now, I've tried to structure my thoughts around three main blocks. The first one is all this data and evidence, what for? What are we going to do with that? Because this is, come back to that. I come from an organization, the OECD, whose bread and butter is to produce data, analysis, and evidence. We do 900 reports every year. I can tell you 4,000 staff, something. And every single report is special, you know, every single report is huge. And I think there's been a bit of thinking on you know, how you make sure this doesn't end in a shelf, how this is actually effectively guiding decision-making, whether this is enough or not, and I'll elaborate a bit on that. The second block is more on the what we are talking about. You know, when we refer to decentralized development cooperation, there's certainly the ODA dimension, but there's a lot that is not the ODA dimension, and we've seen interesting evolutions also in the sort of typologies or types of stakeholders engaged, and I think, Aitor, you touched up on some of them, and then I'll just wrap up with how to get this right. And how to get this right being all the more important for the OECD because we are, and I insist very much, agnostic as to whether countries should do decentralized development cooperation or not. In the same way, we are agnostic, I have to say slightly less on that second part. I think now we're starting to be courageous enough to be more normative and prescriptive on whether countries should be more decentralized or not, at large, beyond development cooperation. But what we're saying is that if you're going that route, there are a number of things that have to be done to make it work. And I think that accommodates better the diversity of situations. Now, on the first point, and I'll be very, very brief on each of them, what for? Let me tell you that when in 2015, I went myself to a meeting of the Development Assistance Committee with your then predecessor in DevCo, to explain this new cooperation with the Commission and this rejuvenation of the 2005 seminal work. Maybe we had 1, 2, 3 countries out of 29 then, that were supporting the work. Most of the DAC countries, even those actually that had decentralized development cooperation practices, but were not necessarily tracking it, were quite, not hostile, but I mean, sensitive and skeptical about the work. For a number of reasons. There were things that you touched upon some of them. This is a fragmentation of official development assistance. There were other situations where there was a rise of populism, whereby, the very concept of solidarity was at stake. There were considerations that were purely financial, the aftermath of the global financial crisis, how you redirect public money to actually core domestic priorities. There were concerns from the very subnational governments themselves that by reporting, they could pave the way for something where it becomes a substitute to the 0.7% target rather than an addition, And so there were a number of things in the planets were not aligned. And many people say, wait, because you start doing the work and then you pave, you provide some guidance, and then it sort of legitimizes also the phenomenon. There were countries telling us, look, it doesn't represent a lot, but the cost of tracking and reporting does represent a lot. You had a diversity of situations. And I can tell you, after the first report, when we went back with Stefano Marta in my team and Rachel Morris to the DAC community, I think there were half of the donor countries that were praising the work. And this had been 3 years, 4 years of work. We're not there yet. Huh? We have 2 more countries tracking official development assistance at subnational level as a direct outcome of this work. And you need maybe 10 more reports to have actually a comprehensive tracking. But my point is, what made this possible? I think what made this possible is that from the onset, the work came from 2 communities of practice at the OECD. In the same way, development cooperation at subnational level comes from maybe or relies on 2 legs within countries. The first one is definitely the DAC, the development cooperation community that has aid effectiveness, that has a creditor reporting system, that has mechanisms, principles, etc. And the second one is what we call at the OECD the Regional Development Policy Committee, which is the part of the OECD that works with and on subnational governments. Not on development cooperation, on every single area that was blind in terms of the development cooperation, was also curious to understand what they're doing, in this outward function. And I think bringing these policy communities together, which means in every single country having the DAC delegate with the guy that is in charge of regional policy in Europe, or that is in charge sometimes of decentralization or of infrastructure, depending on the organization of countries, demultiplied the dialogue within each of the countries to the point that some consensus could be, built on why is this for, what does this bring, and how to the field of development cooperation there are basic principles related to how we work across levels of government that also make sense. And I think this was a long journey, but I'm just saying that the report, and I think it was pretty much the same case in your initiative, is almost the less important in these processes. What is important is the process that actually leads to the report and the underlying dialogue, the way you confront views, the way you build consensus, the way you align the planets. And I think that part is what needs to be pursued and to continue, because the data and the evidence is a means to an end, you know, and the end is really to guide decision making. And so I felt in our side, you know, blending policy communities, you know, and putting around the table people that are outside the development cooperation field, but very knowledgeable and vocal about the role of subnational governments, about their key prerogatives to transform the world where we live, you know, and so on, I think is extremely interesting. And so one report more, but I'm sure, you know, the case studies, the countries, and the insights you'll have this afternoon will be enlightening there. Then the second one was more on what we are talking about, and actually going to the data, I think, I mean, I won't repeat them, you know, where actually 2021, it's 2.8 billion, about 3.6% of the total volume. Some will continue to say this is peanut, you know, in the overall ocean of official development assistance. This is a portion of it, of course. But it's still, you know, increasing. And I think this is interesting. It's increasing despite the rise of populism, despite the global financial crisis, despite, and name it, you know, and it's continuing to increase. And I think that, and some of it may be explained by the fact that we are tracking better, so also we are discovering things that were maybe there, you know, that increase sometimes may not be completely accurate, you know, it's just that now we have the data, the information to show that the volumes are actually expanding year after year. But it's increasing, and in that sense, it's extremely interesting, you know, to document and to continue to put some accountability out there. The other trends that we found, and I'll just depict three of them in the previous work, are, in my view, also similarly interesting. The first one is that it's true that you have a diversity of situations in terms of the implementers. You have some places where, as you rightly said, city to city. Sometimes if you take the Flemish example, for example, you go through a region, you deal with the national government in Mozambique. In the Basque system, it's over 90% goes through NGOs. So I think showing that multiplicity of options is extremely interesting and expands a bit the scope beyond the traditional city-to-city partnership. But one observation we made to ourselves at the time is that maybe regions, as the second tier of government, are much less vocal or visible in their decentralized development. So it's paradoxical to say this here because it's Spain is a bit of an outlier in the system, but then cities, and actually that applies to international cooperation and diplomacy at large. We know mayors are way more, you know, vocal, and we just hosted 50 mayors of the OECD yesterday to discuss the topics of inequality. And you see regions, especially in the European Commission context, that have economic development prerogatives that will be essential, you know, to manage the twin transitions, green, digital, etc., that are recipients also of several, you know, EU funds and instruments, maybe are not fully unlocking their potential, the second tier of government compared to other scales that I found quite interesting. That was the second finding. And then the third one is that I think this idea that we've moved also progressively from a north-south type of relationship into something that is much more sophisticated around triangular cooperation. Sometimes we see also north-north. We're having a lot of discussions now with OECD on what OECD countries, cities are doing with Ukraine, for example, or with other peers. And I think it's rejuvenating a bit the thinking and quite interesting to understand this dimension. So first, maybe underplayed role of regions. Second, much more sophisticated than north-south. And then there's a third angle, which I think in this, what are we talking about, was for me very interesting, is how this helps go one step further in relation to localizing SDG 17. Because to some extent, from a thematic scope point of view, most of the activities cut across the SDGs. When you look at, I mean, they have to do with governance issues, with health has gained a lot of traction in ODA and EDC in the post-COVID. Water and sanitation, we know in some countries is extremely topical. But then there is this SDG 17 where, you know, we've been tracking the distance of regions and cities to that, and some of the indicators are still, you know, access to broadband, and which is fair because, as you rightly said, you know, technology has changed the way we do cooperation internally. But getting on this global agenda, DDC as a proxy indicator explicit for this sort of localized SDG 17 would be, I think, a significant step forward. I think there's a lot, but you need a critical mass and data for that. And that takes me to the last point, and sorry, I've been longer than I wanted, which is on how to get this right. And there are three main messages that have come out of the last piece of work that we did with Andrea and his team. In the sort of monitoring and evaluation framework. The first one is that where the impact seems to be maximal, and where you have better outcomes that come from DDC activities is where local and regional governments are actually focusing on partnerships where they have developed very specific skill sets or technical expertise or competencies, or where they have managed to align their internal inward-looking agenda with their external outward-looking agenda. I'm thinking, I always have the example of gender in the Basque country. It was very interesting with Noemi and the team to see how, they were ring fencing or putting criteria ex ante for gender-related projects in their very selection process, but also applying that domestically. So it's not something that is just for external, I think, and that is very interesting, how this internal expertise is also holding you accountable for the types of activities you do outside. There's a second stream, which is definitely about legal and institutional frameworks. We've seen countries, the law Houdin-Santini in France for drinking water and sanitation that allows you to spend up to 1% of your revenues in sector-specific activities, has completely changed the potential of local and regional governments and water agencies to embark in this journey. And I think really a good example in France that we know is still quite a centralized country of how these legal frameworks can unlock also the potential. And then the third one is really this monitoring and evaluation. And this is the beginning of a journey. It's costly, it's time-consuming, it's data crunchy, but just having an overview of how this is done concretely in terms of outcomes, not only at project level, I think can really change the dynamic and take us to a different scale. So I'll stop here. Really huge words of congratulations to all of you, and we look forward to joining forces in the next phase.
Well, thanks a lot, Aziza. Also very inspiring, your comments, your intervention. I think we all agree on the importance of knowledge, of having data to inform a public policy, because we are talking about public policies and we're talking about public policy. The relevance of this data, of this knowledge to legitimize and to make also decentralized cooperation evolve. And trying to focus on the added value, trying to focus on the impacts, trying to focus on what every tier of government can bring on the table. So this is, I think, also very important. The issue of having legal frameworks would also underline this. For example, in Spain, we have evolved also from this perspective. We have recently approved a new law in international development cooperation that approaches decentralized, that recognizes decentralized cooperation. We have also regional laws that address also the issue, and the capacity that local and regional governments should have to evaluate, to monitor, to bring evidence on the impacts they are achieving with decentralized cooperation. So lots of food for thought for the debate. I don't know, Aitor, if you want to react to these two interventions. And if not, no problems. I will go to the audience. But I give you the opportunity to, if you want to.
I just wanted to thank for these comments and the references to the report. And also I think that both discussions have made very relevant references to very relevant work. In particular, you already mentioned the European Commission. I think not only has had historically this budget line for local governments, but also they have been influential in the discourse, in the agenda by highlighting the importance of local governments in development cooperation. And so has the OECD. I mean, it's true. I mean, this is reviewed in the report. And when you look at even if you are agnostic about it, you do have a strong narrative about how it has to be done. You just said it. And I think this narrative is enough to give value to this type of cooperation, mainly vis-a-vis central governments. Then my second reaction would be about the issue of fragmentation, which is obviously the difficulty of this work. And it affects fragmentation of data. It's so small and so fragmented that it's really costly to collect it. But at the same time, Andrea, you highlighted the importance of technology. We need to find a way to collect that data. Because it's not only the amount. I mean, the amount is only one out of 100 fields, 100 columns in your database. So the database gives you a lot of qualitative information. And if you don't account that cent, you don't get all those fields. So it's very important to incentivize local governments and national governments to channel that information towards the OECD. And then the fragmentation of the action as such. It's very interesting to hear, Andrea, that the delegations have difficulties to liaise with local governments for development purposes. Also, northern local governments have difficulties because they don't have delegations. So I think there is a conversation to be held here and see how everything can be articulated so that your delegations can effectively, of course, tap into the knowledge and the will and even the additional finance provided by EU, regional and local governments. Of course, good to know that there is an entry point.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Well, now I open the floor to the audience. I see many faces that can bring lots of inputs to our conversation. The floor is yours. Who starts? Who breaks the ice? Don't make me go with my finger. Javier, please. Introduce yourself if it's possible. You have a microphone there.
Hi there, my name is Javier Sanchez, and I'm part of this community, and I work in Region Catalunya in development cooperation. We work together with Agencia in that report, and I'm interested also in data with Platforma. And I'm a researcher in the field of the external activity of cities and regions. So even I didn't prepare this, maybe this is a bit tricky, I'd like to say something. Also, following on what Aziza said about the international relations and if they are similar to development cooperation activities. So what we have learned by studying the phenomena of the international activity of cities and regions, which is something that we've been doing for 20 years now, is that the interest of this phenomena is not because of the impact that it has on the system, but rather it is interesting because of what it's telling you about the new international relations and the way the system is reconfiguring. The message is that actorness is not what it used to be. It's not a permanent condition. You go inside and outside international relations because you have an interest, and then you go back home and it's discontinued. No? So what we know about cities and regions, and of course they do behave a lot like in international relations, they do behave a lot like they do in development cooperation. So there's a lot of patterns of similarity. For example, regions and cities. Regions are the way that central governments or nation states organize themselves to deliver cohesion and development in administrative levels. And cities are places where people live. So when you take this equation to the international system, you see that the way they project themselves are very different. And this happens also in development cooperation. There are many a very little number of regions that do development cooperation, because this is something, as you know, because this is Germany, that belongs with the central government, and it's not easy to see why it should go to the regions. No? So my point here would be that there is a lot to learn about by comparing citizen regions in international relations and in development cooperation. And the big tools that we have on both sides, that is international relation theory, the analysis of foreign policies, etc., are not useful to understand what's going on. And the same happens here with development cooperation. We look at development cooperation by citizen regions with the strong lenses of OECD, etc., and that gives us a lot of knowledge. But still, this phenomenon that cannot really be captured by looking at it by this more conventional tools. And it's smaller than we expect also, because it belongs with cities and regions, it is discontinuous. So sometimes we're expecting more than it actually is. I think it's more of a manifestation of the new governance that subnational actors are trying to deliver, that a full transformation of development cooperation. So that would be my point. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Maybe we could, we have Octavio de la Varga there.
Thank you. I'm Octavio de la Varga from the Barcelona Provincial Council, Diputació de Barcelona. And we lead the Observatory of Decentralized Cooperation, European Union, Latin America. And no, thank you, and thank you to the Basque country government for this report, and Aitor for this report. I think when I was reading it, I was quite shocked, I must say. And then I'm happy I'm here today, because then some of my concerns were kind of clarified. And I think you were clear at the beginning. And some weeks ago, some of the people who were here in this meeting were in Marrakesh in a meeting organized by the Capacity Institutional Building Working Group of UCLG, led by VNG. And we agreed that there is not a single definition of decentralized cooperation. And I think that's one of the handicaps of decentralized cooperation. And at the observatory, we have identified at least 15 different definitions of decentralized cooperation, decentralized development cooperation. So when you want to measure something, if you don't have clarity and consensus on what you are going to measure, that's a handicap. So that's one of the problems. But you need to start measuring, and I think that report it's the door to start measuring this decentralized development cooperation. And I think as well that maybe you are not, I don't know if you're aware, and the Basque country government is aware, that you are opening the door for many other discussions. So it's not only about measuring the ODA, you are opening a lot of discussion around decentralized cooperation. I think that's quite important of this report, and we should take it from there afterwards. The issue, and I think Aziza raised as well, so there are some concerns and some reflections, is that you are talking about the sophistication of decentralized cooperation, and as well, I have the feeling is that many actors of decentralized cooperation, many cities especially, they are not aware that they're doing decentralized cooperation. So that's why they are not reporting it. Then as well, increasingly, I'm not saying that there are other entities that we were not aware that they were doing decentralized cooperation. They are carrying out decentralized development cooperation, networks. When a network like Metropolis is launching pilot projects that bring together, I don't know, Bogota with Madrid, or Dakar with Barcelona metropolitan area, this is not measured. Nobody counted as the decentralized development cooperation, and this is a modality of decentralized development cooperation. So that's one of the main problems of decentralized development cooperation, that we don't know who is playing there. No, we know some of them, some of the players. Then as well, I think, and on the other hand, I think this report is very interesting because, as well, from sometimes I consider myself a bit Taliban of decentralized cooperation. You're confronting us to the reality. I mean, when you realize that decentralized direct cooperation, that's something some of us we've been championing for many years, it's only little part of this ODA. That also puts things into a certain context and makes us to think about it. So that's also important. And as well, some of the contradictions, when you acknowledge it, when you see this, that part of this decentralized cooperation is almost 50% is on students' grants. Who are those students? And most of the time are the elites of the countries that are who are benefiting from this decentralized cooperation. So, and when we talk about decentralized cooperation after transforming cooperation, we need to take into account. So maybe you say it, so I'm repeating part of what you said. So just to reconfirm is that maybe we need to kind of start to develop a new methodology, a framework for measuring decentralized cooperation, taking into account ODA, but only as a part of that. So because otherwise, we're missing some points. So thank you.
Thank you, Octavi. Here we have Adrian.
Hello, I'm Adrien Lisha. I'm coming from ALDA, the European Association for Local Democracy. Just to complete a little bit on the reflection, as you mentioned, the idea of extending the way we monitor the action through the impact. I think that there is this continuum of activities for decentralized cooperation from the bilateral to the networks, as you mentioned. And even after the networks, there is the engagement with some of the biggest donors, the development banks, etc. And maybe it could be interesting to also monitor the level of decision making or what the decentralized cooperation enable these agencies to achieve. So identifying the right topics, the right persons, and maybe it could be also additional information to convince governments to monitor this activity, or maybe not. Data will tell us, but I think it's also an additional thing to be explored. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we could come back to the table, and I will invite you to react to these three comments if you want to, before opening another round or going to the online audience. So, I don't know, Aziza, yeah?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Thank you very much. I share a lot of what you've said and actually don't have much to add. Maybe on the parallel between international relations and development cooperation and the role of cities and regions, I think this is spot on indeed. There's a bit of a trend of, or there's a bit of a concern of cities growing apart in some European countries these days, but not only. We've seen, you may recall, when the Trump administration left the Paris Agreement, we had 300 leading mayors in the US stepping up and saying, we want to stay, and set very bold, levels of ambitions and aim much higher than the national government in terms of the net zero targets we are aiming for by 2050, etc. We've seen recently in Europe this Pact of Freedom that brought together a few mayors that were building a coalition in resistance of trends in their respective countries. So there's there's always been, this sort of feeling in many OECD countries that the large metropolitan areas, being the engines of growth, are also sometimes not so inclined to play the game of the solidarity within their own countries, including in terms of fiscal equalization and redistribution. I mean, we've seen this in Spain as well. I mean, Barcelona is a very good example. So, and that's interesting. I think it's a trend, it's documented, there's a lot of literature there. And what we've tried to do recently, we're about to release at the OECD what we call the Regional Outlook 2023, is to do sort of scenarios of the future of regions in that polarized, multi-crisis environment where there is this temptation to grow apart. And we have basically 3 types of scenarios by 2045. We're trying to polish them now, but you have the first scenario, which is on one side of the continuum, which we call the foregone region. So regions are completely disappearing, nation states are re-centralizing. As we've seen sometimes, COVID-19 re-centralized because you better manage crisis, etc. On the other side of the continuum, you have the region state. So nation states lose a lot of influence, but then regions, the world is almost an aggregation of regions, that themselves become super powerful entities in this para-diplomacy, etc. And then in the middle, you have something that sounds more realistic, in the medium term, which is the region, the sort of cooperative environment where you find the right balance of devolution, capacity, empowerment across levels of government. So I think there's in an environment where there's really where globalization is generating a lot of discontent, where economic power is shifting. and where really the cohesion, as you rightly said, is at the core of what sustains and legitimates the regional level in many countries, to make sure the world is not split, between rural and urban, and sort of. I think there's something there that is maybe untapped. I agree with you, and I think it's you gave some numbers, Andrea, earlier, and I finish here on public investment. When we look at the OECD countries, so have some Latin America, no Africa, we see that 2/3 of public investment is actually discharged by regional and local levels of government, including when you go, for example, to areas where massive investments are required to fit for the future, such as climate-related transitions. I mean, 64% of public investment and over 55% of public spending that goes to climate-related infrastructure that is discharged by subnational level. So it's not just a political issue. I think there's a moment where, you have also a reality check of where the balance of power is to face those big transitions. And so, yeah, this growing apart trend, I think, is a very interesting angle to appraise the evolution of development cooperation too, I think.
Thank you, Aziza. I don't know if you want to react.
If I can just continue on the investment topic that is related to our global gateway strategy. I think that even small cities shouldn't be afraid about investments, because an investment can really change the life of people. But the investment is not starting when they are putting the first brick. It starts years before. And the preparation of an investment is crucial. And the consultation of the people is crucial. And the role of local authorities in this process to identify the right investment is key for the success of a strategy like the Global Gateway. So even if a local authorities is not the implementer of the investment, there is a huge space to influence, to dialogue, to lobby for investment. And the question is, decentralized development cooperation can provide tools, skills to local authorities, especially in the area of the world where the people need more to respond to this. That's the question. I think, yes, we should find a way. We know by the numbers that there is a lot of space, and then the implementation of the investment. So even if a local authorities is not implementing, we need to check that the investment is done according to accountability and the best quality respect to the investment. And then, if I may, one minute, I make an example of an investment in Ecuador, because then when we talk about an example, it's easier for me to explain. I hope also for you to capture my... in Ecuador, there was a small municipality, Puerto Viejo, in Manabí, that is a relatively poor region along the coast of Ecuador. And like Puerto Viejo, there are several municipalities in Ecuador. Is not one of the largest. So we have Quito, Guayaquil, Cuenca, Guaranda, and then the other municipalities are small, like Puerto Viejo. And so it's incredible that the main global gateway investment of the European Union in Ecuador is happening in Puerto Viejo. Why? Because there was a sort of consultation among all the actors. There was the mayor of Puerto Viejo, very active, looking for a project that could change life of people. And so that project was water and sanitation. The international cooperation understood the importance of the project. Development banks provide funds for the investment, and the European Union, under a blending operation, provide grants to extend the project to the periphery of the town to reach poor people. So when started the operation 5-6 years ago, the investment is starting now. So can you imagine the global gateway strategy of the European Union is starting now, and we will listen about it for the next 15, 20 years. And if we want that something happened at the field and something of quality, of course, resolving problem of the poor people, there is a lot of space and time to act and organize. I have another point, but later on.
Oh, if you want to, you can go ahead, because we are going now
no,
to the
because
questions.
it's about reporting, analysis. So on the global gateway, so you receive your daily amount of global gateway. I'm receiving every day a lot myself. We would like, with Platforma, to produce a very simple concept note that will have a political angle, because we want to provide evidence inside DG INPA of the importance of local authorities in the implementation of the global gateway strategy. And so all the input of the member of Platforma will be very useful to have a very strong case. And then with the team of Aziza, we are discussing on the possibility to develop a more wide analysis using our city-to-city program to see how the partnership, 57 partnership in our city-to-city program, can contribute to the implementation of the strategy. So from one side, more strategic political, from the other side, data analysis to see how the city can enter in the global strategy.
Okay, thank you. And Aitor?
Yeah, just a brief reaction to the data comment. Yeah, of course, we should probably think of different methods to measure development cooperation in addition to ODA. Just on that note, I was thinking of TOSDI. TOSDI is already there, but it was there since the post-2015 process, and it's still not filled in by many relevant actors. And they are not small cities, they are big banks, and they're not reporting. So first conclusion, it's difficult to report, it takes time, and it's not only a limitation for cities. And secondly, yeah, the network activity, for instance, is very interesting, something we should definitely measure and something that should contribute to these debates. But also, we should not forget that ODA has a D that stands for development, and this is subject to some checks at the OECD, and it relates to localizing SDG 17, as Aziza said. And I think it has a lot of value because it is cities and regions a commitment to a global norm about redistributing global health. So it's very important also to look after this indicator, even if it has some limits. Just wanted to reinforce it.
Okay, thank you. One very rapid question here, and we will close with the face-to-face audience, and we will go to the online audience, because I have 6 questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Boris Tonauser. I'm advisor at Platforma. So thank you very much for the invitation to the organizers. I will have a very quick comment. And we see in the past years also a developing narrative about the changing nature of decentralized cooperation from aid to cooperation, which are different things. And we often try to argue as well, mobilizing European cities, European actors, saying this is not something you give, this is an exchange where you receive as well. This is an exchange where you have opportunities to be your own capacities. And this is also maybe another challenge to measure. Because very often, and you see the flows are very much unilateral, especially the flow of money, even if you see it ending in country or internationally, but there's a lots of flow of knowledge, lots of flow of competencies that are being learned, lots of ideas that are being sparked, which is very difficult to measure. I admit this is not something we can do, but at least to acknowledge this phenomenon that this helps cities develop themselves, regions develop themselves in Europe. And also a very quick comment on the question of why do we need data? Why do we measure it? What is the end of these means? Very often we see these wonderful reports with lots of examples with frontrunners, with cities who are ahead, regions who are ahead, who share their experience, who are very good in decentralized cooperation, Barcelona, you name them. There is a vast majority on cities in Europe. We have 100,000 local governments in Europe. How many of them are engaged beyond the big cities that we see, beyond the regions that are frontrunners, that are really visible as stars? And this is the challenge as well in Europe, to mobilize this constituency. And it's very often political, it's very often financial, and it's very often basically the development, recent developments in security, developments in perception of Europe in the world, etc., etc. So very often it's a political decision. So we really need to also work with political decision makers with these data, with these examples, to tell them what does it mean to transform this world, and that this transformation also concerns themselves in Europe, not only a village in Africa or a municipality in Ecuador. And I think this should be taken into context.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me go now very rapidly to the questions that are, we have many questions in the chat. I will try to translate some of them. Euskal Fondoa to Andrea Ferreri. Is there room for decentralized development cooperation in EU delegate cooperation? This is the question that Euskal Fondoa is posing. Alberto Santiesteban from the Andalusian Agency underlines something that I agree is very relevant. We have been focusing on the way that European local and regional governments are implementing decentralized development cooperation policies, but would be possible to focus also in subnational governments in partner countries on the ground, how to articulate with them, how to unlock the huge potential they have in terms of resources, skills, capacities, etc. How to operate also with subnational governments in partner countries. Catalina Lopez from Diputació de Barcelona, within the INDICI instrument, would DG INPA support local and regional governments in our work on decentralized development cooperation with EU delegations? Is there a means to support European decentralized cooperation in linking with these delegations on the ground? Arancha from UNHCR makes a comment. We need to make sure that the localization processes are well interconnected, integrating the realities of all territories and cities around the globe, with solidarity and the human rights at the center. So putting the issue of solidarity and human rights on the equation. Jorge Gutierrez from EGOA, Aziza, this is for you. The traditional ODA reporting format seems insufficient to reflect decentralized development cooperation activities and their potential, and possibly occurs in other cases as well. For example, one could think about the issues related to the type of agents and the relationships deployed, or others that delve into the issues of education for global citizenship. Are there any proposals for changing these fields? And finally, back to the Agencia Andaluza de Cooperación, Carmela Vélez. She also links decentralized development cooperation with the 2030 agenda as a key framework to unlock the full potential of the DDC. She agrees on the relevance of technical cooperation, of these direct partnerships, but she also underlines the relevance of decentralized cooperation and its capacity to articulate stakeholders, actors on the ground, to articulate with the private sector, with knowledge-based institutions, etc. These very rapid are the 6 questions that we received through the online. I don't know, I'll give you the floor back to you and before concluding the panel.
You want to go first?
Delegate cooperation.
Delegated cooperation is a modality. And so the point is what is presented to the delegation, the proposal, the kind of partnership member states or actors that can implement delegated cooperation is provided to the delegation. So it's up to all these actors to enter in policy dialogue with the delegation and find the right space to implement. If it's a blending, a delegated cooperation, a grant, fine. The instrument will be the more adequate to the objective. And so I don't know if I answer the question, but yes, it's also a modality that we can implement. And then there was on NDC, decentralized cooperation in relationship with EU delegations. As I said before, the EU delegation, with the new indici, we did a decentralization process like in some countries, but instead to give competences without money, we gave the money, and now we have to provide the competences to our delegation to complete the decentralization process. And so, for answer the question, yes, but be patient with our delegation because they are not used. Also, the indici is new for them. My office here is providing support to the delegation, and so if there are local authorities in the audience today, online also. Count on our office. If you have an idea and difficulties to reach a delegation, we can help you.
I would also recall this TALT facility that you're managing, which is also very interesting.
Yeah, the territorial approach for local development facility is a facility we manage here from Brussels, and is to support delegation. So in principle, we are waiting for the delegation to request support. If not, we are proactive, so we reach the delegation, we explain that they can use the TALT facility, they can do analysis, report, they can support the policy dialogue, we can provide expert, and there is the TAIEX as well, if I may. The TAIEX is a facility that was operating in DG near countries until last year. Now the TAIEX is open to other countries in the world. TAIEX is for a very short mission between public administration, is also open to local authorities. There is a database. We are working with Platforma to increase the number of experts in the database. And so it's another opportunity, and online you can find all the information about TAIEX.
Okay, thank you. Aziza, you want to?
Yeah, very quickly, and thank you, very interesting questions. I'd like to go back to the room question around the fragmented municipalities and the question of scale. And indeed, there's this temptation of working always with the usual suspects. I mean, those that are, because it's a bias that that comes from the very call for applications that we traditionally do. You know, I mean, the more you're exposed to this type of activities, the more you're better placed, you know, to disclose the way you're doing things and amplify your good practices. And I think what you're saying in terms of engaging with smaller cities and mid-sized cities is also all the more important than in OECD and EU countries these days in particular. There's a lot of conversation going on around more quality, balanced, polycentric urbanization that relies on a system of cities of all sizes and not just large metro areas that are the engine of growth. And we see, you know, the appetite to make sure that these cities, especially in the remote hybrid environment that is shaking a bit the spatial equilibrium. I mean, it's nothing like the urban exodus that some saw when COVID started. Now it's not happening because people don't agglomerate in cities just for work. Otherwise, indeed, they would leave if they have alternatives, but also for the services that they provide. But still, I think there's part of this discontent narrative is that there's a winner takes it all approach, and that you need to rebalance a bit. And I think in the decade to come, intermediary cities are going to gain a lot of traction. We produced actually for the G20 a set of high-level voluntary principles on how intermediary cities can localize the SDGs also through city-to-city partnerships, but we need to set the conducive environment to actually accept the risk or let's say the uncertainty that goes with constituencies that are not necessarily ahead of the curve in this field. I agree with ODA limitations, absolutely. I mean, I'm not repeating that. I'm just flagging because there was a link to education made there, that one of the next streams of work that we are considering is how to see the role of higher education institutions in this sort of awareness raising and localization agenda of the SDGs. Actually, we're organizing a side event in the high-level political forum of the UN, and thereby in the same way, you know, we've been going local with SDG 17. There's now different tracks to actually go local with other SDGs. We're actually discussing with Andrea and his team how on the food security we can also unpack what is done at subnational level on SDG 4 in relation to quality education and so on. And then the last point on local and regional governments in partner countries. We're no longer calling them beneficiary countries. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's you know, even the work we did back in 2018, we had 4 case studies: the Basque, Tuscany, the Flemish, and then we had the French with the water system. Most of the dialogue was actually carried out with the promoters of these case studies, and we didn't travel to those countries. We didn't interact with, because it's not how it's not how the OECD works. I mean, we're a very centralized institution. 99% of people are based in Paris. When we worked with Andrea on the 57 partnerships, there were online mechanisms to get feedback from beneficiary/partner countries, but it's true that part of the story is missing. As long as you are just understanding the narrative of the promoter, you may miss, you know, some of the challenges that the partner is facing. And maybe, and I finish here, this is a role for the delegations of the European Union. Because I think the unique advantage that you have, having satellites in the different countries, is that you have this anchor, this place-based, you know, facilitation that can maybe you know, bring or convene the stakeholders and bring a sort of reality check of what may be said from Brussels or Paris. But that's just my 2 cents. This is a shared responsibility, I think.
Okay, thanks. Aziza, I don't know, I thought you're ready. We have to close the panel right now here. We'd like to thank the panelists. I think it has been a very insightful debate. I think we have all agreed on the diversity of realities that we are facing when we talk about decentralized development cooperation, not only in Europe, but also worldwide. ODA and decentralized ODA provides a proxy, provides an approach, a capacity to approach these realities from one perspective, but there are other perspectives. And I think it's also relevant to put the focus in these other perspectives. This afternoon, we are going to approach several case studies to understand also from a qualitative perspective the relevance of decentralized development cooperation. The importance of knowledge, the importance of data, the importance of providing evidence on decentralized development cooperation and its impacts, to provide legitimacy, to legitimize this modality of international development cooperation, but also to make, to inform policies and to make decentralized development cooperation evolve and to be more efficient and to align with the global goals that the international community has. In this sense, having the capacity to measure, to monitor, to evaluate practices, to evaluate impacts, to evaluate results. Also, the relevance of having a framework. We have talked about the 2030 agenda as a relevant framework to unlock the full potential of decentralized development cooperation, but there are other frameworks. I think, for example, the TALT, the territorial approach to local development, provides also a very interesting framework to improve the capacity of decentralized cooperation to have an impact. Legal frameworks, also having legal instruments that provide the capacity to local and regional governments to operate. And finally, I would add the necessity of reinforcing skills, reinforcing the capacities of local and regional governments in Europe, worldwide, to operate in this very exciting and fantastic scenario ecosystem that is decentralized development cooperation. We stop here. It's almost 12:30. Thanks a lot for your attention, and we have the lunch now, and we go back after the lunch. Thank you.